edition of the day where we are talking about indigenous seeds. And to discuss this, of course, we're joined by Martin Muruki, who is the director, ICE Kenya, and Simon Mitambo, who is the CEO, SALT. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. All right, so of course, we've seen a story by Paul Thiongo there about indigenous foods and what people are doing in Tharaka Nithi in order for them to at least sustain something for themselves at the end of the day. So, Martin, let me just pick this up. For example, what do you think when you talk about indigenous seeds or indigenous crops that we are supposed to be planting? Is the society aware of what we're talking about, or is the society aware of really the importance of indigenous seeds?
Yeah, thank you, Nyakundi. And I really appreciate the story that you have already watched from Tharaka Nithi, because some of those are farmers that we are closely work with already. Okay. So like Kagona, who was speaking about seeds, I've worked with her for the last almost 15 years of the empire. The question that you have asked, whether people are aware about the indigenous scenes, yes, they are. And especially the rural folks, they are quite aware about the indigenous scenes. But it's kind of, we got to a point where people got discouraged from what they know to what they don't even know. Because many now have embraced other types of crops, which is very good also for integration and also for diversification. However, the indigenous crops, they have their own space. And that's why people are still, especially in the rural areas where they are faced with the droughts and many challenges around climate, they are still embracing their sins. Yeah.
All right. And Simon, let me bring you in. He has spoken about, of course, people are aware of the indigenous seeds, but are we aware of the importance of the indigenous seeds and what they help, especially in terms of climate change, the resilient crops that we have that can survive through any season that we have? Are we aware of that?
Yeah, I think the lady from Mahero was saying that she was planting one crop and eating the other one. People know the importance of indigenous seeds. For example, we have just heard that there are certain crops that the community already know. If you plant with less rain like now, they can still produce. But also there are those others. And also they know how to plant them with the different rain season, because the amount is usually different. But also what I see is that with the commodification of seed and the commercialization, I think there has been a lot of messages that our farmers also get from either corporate who want to sell their product. Sometimes it could be highly producing, but also intensive in terms of input. But also at the same time, our farmers are also looking at the taste. They're also looking at the level in which that seed can also produce with the limited rain. And they are taking into account all these factors. But now because of the market, sometimes you find people are either planting this for market and also planting this other one for food. So I think this is where the challenge is, but not to say that either, even when sometimes you find people planting some of those corporate seeds, not that they don't know, they know very well. These are seeds that they have lived with for many, many years, since some of them were young people, and even now they continue. So they know the advantages, they know all these aspects. Yeah.
All right. And now let's also look at another issue. Let's look at the different areas that we have. We have the tropics, we have the dry areas, the arsal regions. So what are the benefits of planting the crops in the arsal regions, in these other regions? Because we've seen sorghum, we saw them sowing some of the seeds there, the woman who was singing there. So what is the importance of this, especially in terms of now bringing those crops that are planted there into this other side where people are used to beans, people are used to maize, but now you're bringing in sorghum, you're bringing in millet? Yes.
Yeah, there's something that you have not yet maybe defined that can beg the question of indigenous crops at the same time. Before I go into the question that you have asked me, we need to know there are three types of seeds.
Okay.
But that are very common among the our farmers. One is exotic seeds. These are seeds that don't belong necessarily in that area. For example, watermelon. But it is almost now getting to be part of our culture in terms of eating, in terms of diets. That's one aspect. The other type of seed is traditional seeds. For example, maize. Maize is a crop from Mexico, but it has been accepted over the years, and now it has become part of Kenyan culture, for example.
So can you say it's indigenous?
It's not indigenous.
Okay.
It's traditional.
All right.
We got used to it. Now it's part of our culture. There are communities around in Kenya, you know very well, that cannot do without ugari, for example. So it is so much accepted that it has become part of our culture. There is indigenous crops. These are the natives, the originals, the wheat, the millet, you know, those that are just has been there from time immemorial. So this belongs to the culture of the people. I would say that different crops grow in different agroecological zones. So different areas have different type of seeds. For example, you may find in the Rakadedi, which we have seen the story, we have the upper region, which is towards Mount Kenya, which produce certain kind of crops which do very well and adapt into that cold area and require more rainfall. Then we have the lower side of the Raka, which require very little rainfall, or the rainfall regime is so short that you have to plant those crops that are adaptable. For example, like green grams, rainfall for only one month is good enough for them to produce. So, but we have to look at crops in terms of agroecological zones, suitability of that crop, and at the same time, the culture of the people, the knowledge of the people. Because if you bring to Meru, maybe tell Merus to plant rice, they'll be shocked because they don't even know how it works, or certain types of crops. So you have to really look at agroecological zone, and at the same time, the emphasis around the culture of the people. Yeah.
All right. And now that you've brought in the culture of the people, let me go to Simon and ask about the culture of the people, because last week I remember there's a story we were looking at where the pastoralist communities are now coming into vegetable and these other crops. They are not now focusing on pastoralism alone. They want now to bring this other aspect of agriculture. So Simon, as you look at this, what does this add into the conversation that you're talking about today?
Yeah, I think we are faced with the changing times.
Yes.
And of course, with the climate change. There are even situations where we are also saying that we have also to be more innovative in the way we do things. For example, you find that with the harsh climate, even some of the indigenous seeds might be challenged. But also that is not also to say that, especially for people to change, you know, culture is also not static, but also culture should borrow from an informed position. You don't just pick something because other people are doing it. For pastoralists to embrace growing of food, yes, that is what we call agro-pastoralist. I think it's not a good idea because it also increases the chances of even maybe survival in this context. But also the other challenge now also with the culture, you find that there are certain elements within that particular culture that the community, because our food is also about how we relate. Because when we share seed, when we farm, we bring them into our marriage, and all these things, sometimes they are very basic. So it's also a question that as you embrace, as you become innovative, also you don't lose out the key things that really also define that community. Because the essence of cultural identity is also very critical. So in a way that, for example, when you start in a family, for example, in our context, seed becomes very critical because we cannot start a family without a seed. And you find that from time to time, they are needed. So that is what I can say for now.
Okay.
Yes, culture is not static. People can change. We're even saying that the climate changes also might demand that we begin also to domesticate more wild crops also.
Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes we find that they survive better.
Yes.
In fact, where I come from, Daraka, you find that during very dry spell like now, you might find the wild has a lot of food. And this can also complement the food in the garden. So we have also to be a bit interactive with our environment to see how we can survive better.
All right.
Yeah.
And now, Martin, he has spoken about us for sort of trying to make sure that at least our culture stays with us. And now, you were speaking about exotic seeds that we have. How have they come in? And at this time saying to maybe improve agriculture? Because at the end of the day, those exotic seeds that have come, the way you've said maize, came and we've seen almost everyone embraced that. So has it really affected what we were used to, or it came to, the exotic seeds sort of came to really improve what we know?
Well, I look at it this other way, in a more positive way, that
Yes.
just as Simon has said that culture is not there all the time, it evolves. And some of these crops, I've defined 3 of them, which move from exotic to traditional, then acceptance. Yeah, we have so many crops that are exotic here in Kenya. But to start with, most of the farmers, they don't take up those exotic crops as for their food first. That's not their priority. They always take those exotic crops as part of way to get income for sales, for export, like French beans. You'll not find a farmer who wants to go and plant French beans for their diet or for their consumption at home state, but for export to Europe. That's how they do it. But by default, they end up with a spillover of a small quantity in the kitchen.
Yes.
So somehow we have to look at it from a perspective where we have to empower our people also to get money. That's one thing.
Yes.
They need school fees. They need to take care kids for good health facilities and all that, and so many other things that require economically empowerment. So those are complementary crops. But however, we should not lose everything. Our traditional crops are even more adapted to our environment, even diseases, and they don't require a lot of external inputs. You can only use maybe manure or trash, and that's all. You have to maintain good soil health for our traditional or indigenous crops, for them to thrive, not necessarily fertilizers and chemicals. Yeah.
All right. And now that you've mentioned soil health, Simon, last year in 2024, we had a series of floods. You remember almost mid-year there. There was a lot of rain and crops were really destroyed in the farms. So at the end of the day, how does a farmer cushion themselves if they've decided, okay, we are going the indigenous foods way? So how do you cushion yourself in these times so that when climate change happens and the natural disasters happen, at least you have something for yourself? And now this brings in also even food security.
Yeah, I think, that is something that we need to put in more thought into it, of course. But also when you see this kind of farming in our traditional way of farming, there were those floods, sometimes there are also drought and other climate-related catastrophes. And what we have also seen, even when there has also been cyclones, we just want to look at the bigger picture of how all these challenges also face us. You find that the diversification of how we also do our farming is also very critical. Because even traditionally, you defined our farmers trying to plant diversity of seeds. Because one of the challenges now also with some of the exotic, like the way maize has been introduced, you find that many people want to plant it in plantations. That kind of monocropping is very dangerous. When any either drought or that kind of flood or cyclone come, it is likely to wipe out everything. So to increase the chances of survival and also to minimize and to manage the risk, I think it is always important to diversify the way we plant so that we have different crops also trying to bring synergy to how these other crops grow. So that is what I can say for now, and those has also been advantages also of course there are other ways in terms of how we manage the runoff, because the runoff also, like when you practice permaculture, there is a particular way how you manage, like doing the catchment of the water also would help to also maintain the soil health and also other things like that.
All right.
Yeah.
So Martin, diversification. Yes, spoken about diversification. Is it important?
Very much important. From an ecological perspective,
Yes.
that is one of the ways that we can maintain good farm health and ecosystem health holistically. I remember very well when you look at bees, for example, where you don't find bees, most likely that community is doing a lot of monocropping. But where you find bees, then it means there are diverse crops in that farm that can produce a lot of flowers. And bees are naturally known as pollinators. So they are very important indicator of a healthy farm. So within communities that do a lot of chemical farming, bees run away. And when you lose bees, you lose pollination. When you lose pollination, you lose seeds.
Yes.
So it's a whole cycle that you have to look at it from a perspective of diversification in terms of, in an holistic way. Not just looking at one narrow crop, but look at it in a bigger way. We have talked about soil health. And I will mention this, that soil health is one of the areas that people have really ignored. Yet it is very, very, very important. You can look at soil health in terms of how do you do crop rotation, for example. How do you add manure on that farm? By the way, there are so many people now who are focusing on eating healthy food, organically produced, that does not have chemicals. Very many. And even there are so many companies now in this country who are buying fruits and other food stuff that is produced organically. So even if you look at soil health, you have to look at even the human health at the same time.
Yes.
If you have to improve human health, then you have to improve the soil health.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Now, let's also look at another thing. Now that we are speaking about soil health, we are speaking about monocropping and also even diversification in cropping, in planting. Now, let's look at the harvesting and how it's done. Someone has grown their indigenous crops. They've grown it very well. Now it's time for harvesting. They harvest, and then during storage, when they want to take it to the market, 40% of that goes to waste. And then you find all these others are taken to waste, and then maybe 60% is taken to the market. So at the end of the day, you find that there is a problem when it comes to storage. And now, Simon, let me start with you. When it comes to storage of crops, indigenous crops, what usually goes wrong, and what are farmers supposed to do?
Yeah, I think when it comes to storage, we really have a challenge there, because again, it's a question of, like, now there has also been a lot of pests. That is storage management. You find that a lot of food is also lost through pests, and there were quite a number of ways traditionally that food would be preserved, and to also control that pest. Although also when I look at the rate at which now we have the pest, is quite alarming, because we used to have very limited pests, especially when we were doing the traditional or indigenous crops. I think they generally would just use smoke, but now the type of pests that we find, they are quite alarming. And sometimes, again, also is where Martin was also talking about. When you talk about this, you have also to look at the people's health and the way also people store their food crop. So I think there's a need also to educate our farmers in terms of how to manage this, because you could be having very good harvest, but at the same time, like you are saying, we see that a lot of food is also lost through that harvesting and storage and that kind of thing.
Yes.
So sometimes you might even find you have even to sell something at a throwaway price,
In
because
order
of
to
the challenge
yes.
of the storage.
All right.
Yeah, boss,
Yes, Martin, I know you want to, yes. So now, just give us your perspective and also bring in now the aspect of when it comes to agroecology, when you look at this, what does this mean to a small-scale farmer at the end of the day?
Well, someone has talked about the losses.
Yes.
And I will say, and you talked about 40%, which is very true because you find, and the most affected is maize. Because when maize is harvested before due time, then it is likely to get to, a lot of it will just go. But again, the amount of harvesting also matter again. Like if you get maize or cereals and then they get in contact with the soil, they are likely to get aflatoxin. And aflatoxin is one very dangerous thing. We all know that. It's not it's all known. So we have to really know how do you harvest and when do you harvest. We have seen a lot of times, even with our fruits, like avocado, which is now accepted. Now it's becoming a traditional one. In my second definition, avocado has become part of our culture now. Everyone is eating avocado every morning. But those avocado for export, brokers go to harvest to buy from the farmers before they are ready. And that's why the government has to put in measures to ensure that avocados and macadamia are harvested within a certain period of time for export, so that they caution the farmers who are doing a good job, because out of it has been lost, and maybe even returned, or farmers even lose money. So that's something that we really need to look at in terms of how do you unpack agroecology. Agroecology has many faces. One may call it is part of organic farming, others will call it regenerative farming, others will call it permaculture. There are so many practices around agroecology. And agroecology unpacks beyond the farm. It goes to the environment.
Yes.
How do we maintain our water systems? How do we maintain our rivers? How do we maintain our whole life? It's an integrated system of bringing up the environment in a holistic way. So agroecology is broader than the way we think. So it has to be really unpacked. And I would really say this, in terms of moving forward, especially in this country, we have now agriculture as a devolved function to the counties.
Yes.
And counties have an opportunity to develop agroecology related policies and acts. I have a case that we have supported Murang'a County to do the same. And it is already, it has a law, the very first one on agroecology, and it is functioning. And now planning becomes so easy, even when the counties are allocating budgets, then it can unpack it to agroecology. So that farmers can have an opportunity to get extension services around agroecology, and they do the right thing with that. It's supported by the law.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for that, Martin. And Simon, as Martin is speaking about the agroecology and what the government needs to do, when you look at the farmers in the rural area and of course the farmers in the urban areas, there is a difference because as we look at the information that the farmer in the urban area has, there's somehow some sort of difference from the farmer who is in the rural area or the very remote area. So what do you think needs to be done, especially in terms of how we need to safeguard the indigenous foods that we have?
Yeah, I think also we have to see how these rural farmers and also urban farmers, how they get the information. Of course, in the urban areas, there are more source of information, whereas you find like in the rural area, I think mostly they probably rely on the radio. These days, there are minimal these agricultural extension officers who otherwise are also supported with the information. Maybe there are few non-governmental organizations that also give the information, and these are the people who are also doing their business. So I think what we need also to do, depending on the context, especially for the rural areas, I think is also to see that the media, even the local media, can also help a lot to bring that information. And just like Martin has said, you know, agriculture is also devolved. I think we need also to have our county government do more around developing policies that also guide them in terms of how they can deliver some of this information to our farmers. But also the other challenge I've also seen is that sometimes, while we would also expect some of our county government to support the local farmers, to promote their indigenous crops, sometimes you find that they bring some of these hybrids, because I've seen cases where the county government distributes hybrids, and sometimes, like you were asking the other question, they may not necessarily also blend very well with the ecological, agroecological zone. And I'm saying this because whereas the experts sometimes argue that these are very appropriate for that, you know, that is business driven, as opposed to how the farmers also do their own research, and over a period of time they have seen this can work for them. You know, sometimes they don't go to the farmers even to ask them what they want. They sometimes also want to develop something they can sell. So for me, in terms of information, I think the local media can play a greater role in terms of impacting on the information, and also the county government can also take a bigger role because of the agriculture being developed.
All right, gentlemen, so now I want us to wrap up this conversation. I'll start with Martin, so that you give us your parting shot in terms of what needs to be done in order for us to keep on sensitizing people on the indigenous foods and the importance, because you spoke about someone who wants to just do organic. So just briefly, just give us your parting shot, and then now we'll go to Simon to close it.
Yeah, thank you, Nyakunde. One of the things that maybe I can put across is to make agriculture looks nice. Because many times when you find an advert on agriculture related stuff, it's a old woman or old mama with a djembe. And we have to make agriculture attractive to our young people. And we have to go a step ahead and make sure that even our own indigenous food crops are able to fetch money.
Yes.
Because when you talk about agriculture to a young person, you should have in your mind, this person wants money in the first place. They want to make, to have an employment around agriculture. And therefore we have to support our young people. That's one thing. The other thing is, how do we create awareness to even our policymakers? Because if you look at, by experience, we had an incident where we brought together all the Central Region Economic Bloc. The 12 of them, all the directors and their CECs, we brought them together under the guidance of Governor Kaiga in Nyeri to create awareness about agroecology. And we had a whole 2 days workshop with them. And it was quite interesting because some of them they're not professionals in agriculture as such. But when the conversation is put across, they understand better, and then they are able to support such policies.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that, Simon. Let me just get your parting shot.
I think I want to say that we are what we eat. I think that is the first thing. Our indigenous crops are really the right food to eat. You see that they are also not just food also. I think we'll have better farming when we have a relationship with our food. I loved the film where when the woman was just grinding, she is singing.
Yes.
When we are cooking our indigenous food, can we tell them something? Our food is live, it is dairy, hears us. And even when we go to farm, we sing food for the crops. But these days, you know, some of this life, it was called agriculture, you know. Putting a culture in it makes it more life, and really, it makes meaning also to keep our seeds. And that is why you see these days, because we have lost them, we have to go back to the old women just to find that they still have. Seed is very important, and I think it's very sacred. And I know of a story of one woman who lost life and left seed for life continuity. So they are that very critical.
All right.
They are very important.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on this particular conversation where we're talking about embracing indigenous crops. That is Simon Mitambo, who is the CEO at SALT, and Martin Muroki, who is the director, ICE Kenya, joining us today on Farm Kenya to discuss about this particular conversation. All right, we've come to the end of this edition of Farm Kenya. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi. Keep it KTN.